Hello? Rescue hooks to rescue, Mayday! Get ahead, West. Fast, Mayday, what's your location? Get the hell out of here, hurry up! We need radio silence, I need water in that 2.5 inch line. 48 inch water in a 2.5 inch line. To the rope, to the rope. 35 in the rear, 35 in the rear.
Welcome to the Emergency Traffic Podcast. Hello and welcome to another Tailboard Talk on the Emergency Traffic Podcast, a place where we gather to discuss current events or trends in the fire service informally. This is Tailboard Talk number 20. We have not done one of these for a while, but a recent report just came out from the NFPA this month, authored by Richard Campbell, that relates directly to this podcast. So we thought we should chat about it here. The report is a statistical review of firefighter fatalities during interior firefighting operations over the past 25 years, from 1998 to 2022. We do not review the statistics, but review and discuss some of the findings from the statistical analysis. Joining me for the episode are our regular co-host Denis and frequent guest host Gordon. Both of these people are very experienced retired chief fire officers and have worked as fire service expert consultants for many years across North America. So grab a coffee and step onto the tailboard with us to hear what they have to say. Yeah, well, this week we have two esteemed guests on the tailboard with us. We have Denis, a regular co-host, and we have Gordon Routley, who also has appeared with us a few times in the podcast, 4 or 5 times, to review some incidents. And this week we're going to talk about here the recent report that came out about firefighter fatalities in interior structural firefighting that came out by Richard Campbell through the NFPA in February of 2025. So we wanted to discuss that. So I'll just let Denis and Gordon say hello here and get introduction remarks in. And then I'll pull a few excerpts out of the report and we can chat about them as this report, which is indicating a good way. It's going the right way. It's going down. So that's good. But we can discuss that. Okay. Denis, go ahead.
I was just going to say hello. I'm rapidly losing my sense of humor over winter. My electric bill is due in another month or so, and we've had the heat on full since early December. And I'm not on gas, Paul.
Or Saudi Arabian oil.
Yeah. Well, out here in the East Coast, we are on gas, but they use that to generate electricity. So I'm indirectly on gas, and there's a significant markup between the gas prices and the electricity prices. So,
right. Yeah, it's not efficient.
So I'm going to have to mortgage my house to pay my electric bill. Well, probably not, but anyways, it's not much fun. Yikes. My driveway's a sheet of ice. Everything's iced over. It's just miserable.
I heard that. Yeah, you guys got lots of ice. Yeah. The weather broke here yesterday, actually. It went from minus 20, minus 30 to plus 2 yesterday, plus 3. So it's crazy. We're liking it now. And Gordon, how's the weather?
How's the weather? Well, I'm in my my winter hideout in Florida. And I got to say, January was pretty cold down here. There were actually a couple of nights that we had to figure out how to turn the heat on. We weren't really sure that there was heat, but we found it and turned it on because there were a couple of nights that it was just a little bit too cool. But February has been beautiful. I don't know if you can see out behind me, but it's looking pretty good out on the golf course. In the meantime, I'm talking to people in Montreal almost every day, and it's a disaster area. They're completely snowed in. I have a
2.5 feet.
Yeah, I have a doorbell camera on our house in Montreal, so I check it every once in a while. I say, we're not coming back until I can see green.
Nice.
No danger now.
I remember as a kid, and you guys would too, in Montreal. I was just a kid. My dad was talking about going to work, and he had chains on the back of the Oldsmobile, and he would drive to Montreal to the East Island to go to work. And he told the story one time of he can't figure out why he can't get over this lump of snow, and it turns out there's sparks coming off the back wheels, and it's because he's on top of a car. He had no idea that as he was driving through those massive snowstorms. Yeah, crazy.
Yeah. I remember it so well, and I feel so guilty not being there.
I bet. Yeah. Lucky your friends probably don't listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
They'll twist you on that one.
You mean lucky they don't know where you're living now? That's what you mean.
Yeah. No. Yeah. They do know.
How many beds have you got, Gord?
We could actually handle 3 or 4 visitors if they could get here.
I think we need a podcast session down there. We should have timed it in January in time with the Fire Department Safety Officers Association meeting or something.
That was just up the road. I was up there, but that was during the cold spell. So everybody who came down expecting to to be walking around in shorts and flip flops was severely disappointed.
I think that's
but
actually
there's cold, and then there's cold.
That's actually where you and I reconnected, Gordon. I think after years of doing fire truck demos and stuff, and we hadn't seen each other. I've gone away and I'd done the fire stuff, and then I'd gone down there with Clearwater Regional Fire, and you were there, and it's like, hey, I know you. That was cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see. Since 1977, the National Fire Protection Association has collected information on-duty firefighter fatalities and maintained the information in a database known as the Fire Incident Organization. Of course, one comment, of course, is we're losing, maybe NIOSH is losing some power to investigate firefighter fatalities as they've lost some people on their staff with recent changes, but we'll deal with that as it goes, I guess. First of all, so what they did is they did a study between 1998 and 2022. The research had identified 223 fatal interior structure fire incidents, which resulted in the death of 291 firefighters. Of course, the object of this whole podcast is we get together, we study these fatalities and try to find out and discuss what went wrong to prevent them from happening in the future. So when this report came out, it's like, hey, this is exactly what we're talking about. We want to talk about it some more here. So Denis going to jump in here right away.
I was just going to say it's important to note that NFPA stripped the 9/11 data out of this.
Yes.
So the 9/11 LODDs are not in this data. And they did that, I'm trying to remember, it was like 2002 or something like that, like shortly after the incident, because it's such a massive skew. It doesn't address the trends. So the 9/11, so the 343 at the tower and any lost in the Pentagon, in other words, they're not in these totals. So some people are going to look at these totals and say 200 and some firefighters. Well, that's not right. Well, it isn't right, but it is right if you ignore 9/11. And for those of you who are not old enough to know 9/11 happened in 2001, the World Trade Center bombings. So I'm sorry to have to add that, but yes.
Yeah. I knew as the statistician in you wrote that in a Facebook response to this a week ago too. So I knew you had to get that out. Very good.
Yeah. Of course, the other thing that's interesting is it focuses directly on interior structural firefighting, which is where we all tend to think that most of the firefighter fatalities occur. But it's more and more evident that they're really a relatively small portion of what we consider line of duty deaths. And as we expand what we count as line of duty deaths, that portion becomes smaller all the time. Because we keep expanding the definition of what counts as a line of duty death.
And I failed to maybe introduce you properly because you've been on the show before, but for listeners that might not know it, so former chief of Montreal, been a fire investigator and a fire protection scientist since the early 90s, late 80s. You worked for the 70s. U.S. Early 70s, okay.
But who's counting?
Who's counting? And you investigated dozens, if not hundreds, of significant fire incidents for the U.S. Fire Administration and NFPA and other agencies. You joined us on the episodes where you were the lead investigator, of course, for Charleston and for the Seattle Pang Fire and Breckenridge, Pennsylvania, and many other significant incidents where you were the investigator. So you have that knowledge of interior and firefighting fatalities, member of the Fire Department Safety Officers Association forever, and that's why we appreciate that you're able to join us on some of these podcasts. The number of firefighters who died from injuries sustained in interior fire operations has declined over this 25-year period, but there's also been a downward trend in the number of fatal structure fire incidents and the number of interior structure fires. The annual number of fatal interior structure fires incidents between 98 and 22, the overall trend for the period indicates a distinct decline in the number of interior fire structure fatality incidents over this time. The figures, which you can't see unfortunately in the podcast, the highest number of fatality incidents occurred between the 3 years with 15 incidents in each year, all of which fell between 98 and 2008, so at the start of this study, if you will. At the low end, 7 of the 8 years with 6 or fewer interior fatality incidents has come in the years since 2008. However, a rise of incidents in 2021 and 2022 is a concern following these record lows in the number of fatal incidents of 4 or 5 preceding years. And we've seen that. We saw the 3 or 4 in Baltimore. We've seen numerous multiples again. And so that's where the question comes up is like, what's going on, right?
Yeah, and it's important to focus on the trend over time as opposed to individual years, because line of duty deaths are relatively infrequent in comparison to the total number of fires. If we say there are around 500,000 fires a year, and there may be between 10 and 15 that involve firefighter fatalities, it's a very small percentage. So when we see fluctuations of plus or minus 5 from one year to the next, that's really not surprising because these are individual events. So we've had years that got down, I think, as far as 2 incidents where firefighters were killed in interior structural firefighting, and other years in the period, I think that the highest got up around 18. But when you look at the trend, that's a 25-year trend. And basically, the trend line over 25 years is close to 50% reduction, both in the number of firefighter fatalities in interior structural firefighting and the number of incidents that involve firefighter fatality. So the number of fires is coming down. The number of fires in which firefighters are killed is going down, and the number of firefighters that are killed is going down. And they've all come down close to 50% over 25 years. And if we go back to the 25 years before that, we saw a similar trend line. Because if we go back 50 years, the rates were much higher.
I'm wondering if the recent spike, the last 3 years, might be due somehow to also the homelessness problem, in that we're having more squatters in buildings and stuff like that are in poorer shape, and firefighters are going in to check on them to try to get them out. Baltimore, Detroit, we're seeing so much of that. There was one just a day or two ago where firefighters had rescued someone out of a building who had burnt several times, that building, and squatters have been removed several times. So that might be attributing to the recent 2 years. So in 2020, we had 3. In 2021, we had 8. In 2022, we had 7. So, right away, we got that spike near the end here. The lowest number, like you said, was 2 back in 2017. And the highest was 15, which we hit several times. We hit in 98, 2005, and 2008, or 2007, 2008.
Yeah, everybody in the business seems to be looking at the increase, first the increase in the number of structure fires the last 3 or 4 years. Really, kind of since COVID, the rate of fires had been coming down, and suddenly it started going back up, and everybody's looking and saying, "Okay, what's going on?" And COVID upset a lot of stuff. The homelessness and squatter situation is an impact, particularly in in cities in the U.S. And of course, this is all U.S. statistics. The Canadian numbers are really so small that it's hard to analyze them. So we're looking at U.S. statistics, but the number of fires and the number of firefighter fatalities fighting those fires has bumped up the last 3 or 4 years. And everybody's kind of looking at it and saying, okay, which factors are playing into this? Because we were doing well, and suddenly we're not doing so well.
Well, one of my favorite sayings was, "What are the three main causes of fires?" And it's men, women, and children. So it's people for the most part. I mean, you do get equipment failures, and you do get all kinds of other reasons why there might be fires, but it's the changes, I think, in the built environment. It's the changes in the fact that there's more people home now than there used to be. So they're using their buildings, their homes more. So they're home more, and they're more likely to have incidents because they're home. The heat's turned on. They're cooking. They're using candles or whatever the case may be. I think the deterioration in the as-built environment structures in general, like you were talking about, like economic hardship leads to socioeconomic issues, which leads to declining fire safety. We're seeing around here, and I can only speak for my experiences in my last job and around here too. There's also an influx of immigrants who have different ways of living. I can think of some situations where people were using a bathtub as a stove, and so there's those necessarily communications disconnects between fire safety messages and language barriers with those populations, and habitual barriers, like how they live their lives is different. They're not used to the building stock that's here, and so I think there's a lot of reasons, and I think that the trend, the little bump up in the last couple of years, may just get leveled out over time, but I suspect it may be plateauing. And for every statistic, there's a limit that you don't necessarily get below a limit. It just sits there.
Well, some of the more recent incident in the past 5 years that come to mind where there were significant civilian fatalities were due to the change in how we use buildings, how we use appliances, everything. I think of the boat fire off of California that killed, I don't know, a dozen people or so because all their cell phone chargers were charging at night and overloaded the electrical system, and the boat caught fire.
Yeah,
It was a tour boat. And then the one in Montreal that you had, Chief Routley, which was the Airbnb in old
yeah,
downtown Montreal, in a building that really wasn't designed for that in the first place, and you had all these different people renting different suites, and then you have a fire,
yeah,
that's a change in how we live a little bit.
yeah,
But some of
yeah,
those were arson, though, eh? I think repeat arsons.
yeah. I mean, the cause of the fire was arson, but the the the
The deaths
reality
weren't.
of the building and the occupancy was the sort of the unexpected. It was
Mm-hmm.
really interesting when COVID was active, because we went through a period of about 6 months where suddenly everybody was staying home, and we
Yeah.
saw the residential fire rate bumped up significantly. And it comes back to, the cause of fires is men, women, and children. And if they're all staying home, that's that many more opportunities to have fires at home. And the corollary of that was automatic fire alarms in commercial buildings went down because nobody was there.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So let's look at this report a little bit more. So interior firefighter fatalities by year. The report states that, again, fluctuations in the number of fatalities over the entire period are apparent. The highest numbers of annual firefighter fatalities are concentrated in the 3 years between 98 and '08. The spikes in the number of fatalities in 99 and '07 are particularly notable. They were largely influenced by these extreme multiple fatality incidents in those years. The 25 interior fatalities in 99 include one 6 fatality incident and 2 3 fatality incidents, while the 27 interior fatalities in '07 include a 9, which was South Carolina, Charleston. In addition to the jump of 15 in 2013, followed 4 years with 11 or fewer. These are all influenced by single 5 fatality incident. So, we're seeing these big ones. Now, maybe we've learned from those. We had like say, you had a bunch where we had all these multiple fatality incidents where there was systemic issues with the agency that responded. Charleston, for example, you discovered and rectified a whole bunch of those, Chief Routley. I'm trying the other ones, Seattle, the Pang Fire again. I can't remember what year that was. That was
94, 95.
95. Yeah, 95.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
so maybe our behavior's changed. I know if you take Baltimore, where the 3 firefighters or 4 firefighters died in 2022 or 21, their incident command has been completely revolutionized since that fire. They've reacted and they've trained their staff up
yeah.
and their better practices. So hopefully, maybe we're learning. I don't know.
It's a hell of a way to learn, though.
It
Yes.
is. But if you look at the way we fought fires, I mean, I could go back 55 years to the way we fought fires and how we've gotten better at it, and and introduced all kinds of improvements steadily over that period of time, most of which the objective was to reduce the risk to firefighters and to reduce firefighter fatalities. And
Uh,
looking over a long term, this is a 25-year block. If we looked at a 25 and a 50-year block, we'd see a significant steady improvement. Some bumps along the road, but certainly a steady trend line downward.
Well, I mean,
But it's
the whole objective of you and Hoot Gibson building a fire command training program in Phoenix with Chief Brunacini, that was all driven by safety. How do we
Yeah,
handle a fire safer, especially on the larger scales of these, resources where you have hundreds of firefighters and dozens of fire engines on scene attacking a building? How do we manage that? Which has had a worldwide or definitely a North American wide impact with fire command in action and now blue card and incident command and stuff like that. So, I mean, when were you in Phoenix doing the training center?
well, I was in Phoenix from 74 to 89, so
Right.
we were implementing one thing after another. And then I was involved in the development of NFPA 1500 from 84 to 87. It was the first edition was adopted in 87, and that was a really big effort involving a lot of people and organizations to reduce firefighter fatalities.
Because firefighters were
Uh,
dying. That's why it was there, right?
yeah,
They need to be fit, they
yeah.
need to be healthy, they need to be properly protected, they need to be trained. That's all in there.
Yeah, I mean, I
but
can
the
remember
statistic.
fighting fires, doing interior structural firefighting without breathing apparatus, without a portable radio, without an accountability system, uh, without any kind of structured command, versus the way it's done today. And it's hard to believe that any of us survived.
Yeah, yeah. Go put the wet stuff on the
I
red
would agree
stuff
with
and don't
that.
worry about it.
Yeah,
I missed
So,
that.
but
Just I was 10 years behind you guys, so I missed that. Luckily,
yeah. But the statistics don't tell the underlying story, right? It's just numbers.
yeah.
And so, and all the things that Gordon's talking about there, about all the changes and improvements and the steps forward and the technology and the methodology and the OGs and the awareness and all of that kind of stuff, you would think we'd get a much more dramatic drop in firefighter fatalities than what we've seen, because there's offsetting things like buildings are becoming um, more worn down. Efficiency of the buildings has been declining. There's older stock. Some buildings are being vacant now. and deliberately so, because they want them in a condition where they can justify tearing them down. And we just had a big fire here in Halifax where they burned out a school that took up half a city block.
Yeah.
I had a fire when I was in my last job with it, that I was on scene for 48 hours and burned out an entire city block. So these things happen, and there's very similarities. The building was left vacant by the developer. And so the obvious is going to happen. Every time I drove by, it says there's a fire waiting to happen.
Yeah.
So, those types of fires, the fire department arrives on scene and says there might be somebody in there. So they go in. So that's offset. All that technology is offset by the risk in the community. It's also offset by staffing. So there's problems now where you've got growing municipalities, and the staffing and financing proportionally is not keeping up with those demands. So firefighters are finding themselves arriving at a major fire with 3 on the engine, 2 on the engine, and feeling compelled to go and do something, and maybe getting themselves in a jackpot because of that, or not having enough staffing to fill out the command tree and to look after safety and all these other things. Even though the building is vacant, we can get ourselves in a jackpot. So I think that the fatalities would be going down further, and maybe, if it wasn't for these other factors. And I think we've seen this in the podcast, Paul. We've seen understaffing, failure to throw ladders, failure to do 360s, failure to implement proper communications, just failure after failure. And what was it that was brought up at a conference? Is, why do you keep repeating the same things over and over again?
Exactly.
And what did Vinnie Dunn say? Because we're not very imaginative. We keep killing them the same way. We're not
I know
learning.
they were complaining about NIOSH reports being repetitive. It's always the same problems. And Vinnie Dunn's response was, it's because we haven't figured out a new way to kill a firefighter. We keep doing the same thing over. Now, how much of this, there's a lot of this that's systemic. We all know that fire department organizations are hard to change. I mean, Charleston, Chief Routley, you ran up against the biggest one right there. Right, resistance to change, resistance to learning, resistance to new things, and we see it everywhere.
And everybody acting.
How do we do this?
Yeah. Well, that was kind of an extreme example where you looked and said that they were so set in their ways and almost determined not to adopt new methods and procedures until they had the fire and 9 firefighters died.
Almost 20 years ago now, eh?
It was 2007. It's 18 years.
Yeah, it's coming up on 20 years.
Yeah,
it's a while.
But if you look at that department today, they're right on the leading edge. They're doing all the right stuff.
Which is why we do the podcast.
Yeah.
Right, to educate people, because they get stuck in the way.
Yeah. And we hope that we don't have to kill somebody in every fire department, to get that fire department to move forward. And exactly. I think, overall, we've made tremendous strides. Mm-hmm. Maybe not, we haven't gone as fast as some of us would like to, but we've come a long way. We've made a lot of progress.
Look at, the whole fire command, and then Blue Card, which was exactly this. How do we train incident commanders? How do we make a universal system? And now Canada adopting, in some areas, this effective command by Catherine Lamb, which is essentially a virtual live test of incident commanders to make sure that they're following ICS and they're following their SOPs and stuff. It's growing in Ontario. It's growing in, I know Edmonton's been doing it, and Winnipeg, to try to change organizations, because they're so, especially when they're so big, especially when you have 1,000 members, how do we train them, right? So, good. Well, so in the report it says, despite a rise in fatalities in the last couple of years, there is an overall trend towards decline in the 25-year period. Now, of course, we've mentioned that the numbers of fires have changed. So in light of the fluctuations of the annual numbers of interior structure fire fatalities, incident, and death, an alternative way of assessing the trend data is to look at 5-year averages for these metrics. So they did a chart with 5-year averages and showed that it is declining. The average over 5 years in 98 to 02 was 16, whereas 18 to 22 was 7. So the 5-year average of fire fatalities has been going down steadily. In fact, every 5-year increment shows a decrease, which is good. Important, though, that structure fires has also declined, which is important to understand. So then they did another survey in here where they based it on rates per 100,000 structure fires over 25 years to help our understanding whether this observed downturn is influenced solely by the number of fires that have gone down. They have another table here. Even when the average number of structure fires has increased over the period, as they did in 2013 to 2017, 2018, 22, declines in the number of structure fire fatality incidents and deaths resulted in lower fatality and incident death rates. The incidents falling to 1.3 and 1.5 per 100,000. So if you look back at 98, it was 3.4. And if you look here now, 2018, 2022, the 5-year average went down to 1.5 per 100,000 structure fires. So it looks like it's going down.
And one of the things that's important, and I've been involved in this discussion a few times over the last 20 years or so, is the number of firefighters who are killed in interior structural firefighting is going down because we're getting better at it. But the reported number of total firefighter fatalities hasn't gone down. In fact, it's gone up because now we're counting cancer deaths, which were never counted before. We expanded the heart attack deaths that are counted as line of duty deaths. We have more deaths in traffic accidents than we used to have.
A lot more deaths.
So the total number has gone up, and the total number has even gone up in comparison to the number of fires. But the number of deaths attributable to the fires has gone down.
Yeah, it's all those, the highway traffic. I mean, the highway is one of the most dangerous places our responders go to now due to a number of factors, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A fire department that responds, on a major expressway, the highest risk thing they do is going to an accident at night in the rain or on a snowy night, on the expressways. Probably a lot more dangerous than their typical interior structural firefighting operation.
Actually, I think the ones on the icy roads are safer. I see some of the accidents that are happening on the interstates in Florida versus the ones that are happening on the interstates in Alberta. And I think we're killing more firefighters on the interstate in Florida than we are in Alberta. And I think it's just bad drivers, speed, road design, respect for flashing lights and emergency workers and first responders. It's just not there, man.
Well, it's very scary on some of the roads. Just to be driving on the roads is pretty scary. To be working an incident on some of them,
But I drove to Red Deer. I drove to Red Deer a couple of days ago, and there was a recovery or tow truck vehicle working on a vehicle, and then they had another vehicle further back, which is great. They had a warning vehicle on the shoulder, but then they had the operator in a traffic vest with a sign behind or towards the traffic from that warning vehicle. Like, why are you standing there? Stand in front of your vehicle so you're protected by that block. So the education isn't out there. Getting off topic now, but definitely, all these other responses or issues about firefighter line of duty deaths is affecting it. So it's the fire. We've succeeded somewhat in saving people in the fire by PPE and training and command and communications, but now it's those adjunct activities that
there's work to do.
Always work to do. Yep.
Yeah, we've had a few talks talking about now that the price of a new fire truck is $1.5 million and up. It says
U.S.
It feels pretty crazy to park your $1.5 million fire truck as a blocker. He said, can we get an old dump truck filled with sand and have it respond and use it as a blocker?
Yeah, some places are doing that, but not very many.
Because a lot of blockers are getting whacked.
They are. Yep, for sure. Let's see what else.
I think the solution to that is they should have a big sign on the back saying "Hit me." That should be all it takes to save them.
That would help.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's worth noting that the reduction over the 25-year period in the number of fatal incidents that claim the lives of 3 or more firefighters. So the bigger incidents are going away, as we said. We're learning from those big incidents. Maybe, I hope. They went into the causes or nature of firefighting fatalities. So why did they die? In one of the tables here, they have 3 in 10 firefighter fatalities, or 30%, 31%, resulting from firefighting incidents were caused by some form of structural collapse. So the structure gave way on it. That goes to your comment, Denny, about the built up environment is failing us, whether it's a 100-year-old building or it's a lightweight truss 20-year-old building or 10-year-old building. The structures are failing us. So roof collapse, floor collapse. There was 51 fatalities from roof collapses, 30 fatalities from floor collapses. So 10% of the total. Injuries caused by firefighters being caught or trapped by rapid fire accounted for 57, 20%, which I was happy to see. That wasn't as high as I thought it would be, because in the emergency traffic podcast, we cover a lot of rapid fire progression fatalities where they're caught unawares because of flow path and all those kind of things.
But for instance, look at floor collapse. We've had several, not huge numbers, but we've had several cases of firefighters falling through floors in new residential occupancies. Some of them, monster McMansions, and some of them just ordinary, 1 and 2 family dwellings. Fire in the basement, and firefighter falls through the floor. Well, that's because typical floor construction now is just barely strong enough to hold up the floor, and has no inherent fire resistance, which could be corrected.
Gord, there's a training and awareness component of that.
There's training and awareness, but several of them have been cases where it was just that it didn't look like there was anything that bad going on until somebody fell through into the basement.
Yeah, the carpet was good.
Yeah,
we just did an episode like that, a month ago or so, and we got another one coming up, and there's been a lot of that. The McMansion thing is a problem for firefighters. It definitely is, because you've got this. They're not, because of their occupancy type, they don't fall under the same fire code as a commercial, but yet they're the size of a commercial building, and they can hide the fire for so long. And typically they don't have a good water supply. They're rural, delayed alarm. All these things play factors in. So, that's a watch out situation for our firefighters. As they pull up to the McMansion, they go like, hang on a minute, we better think this one through, because the risk is higher. The same as if you were going into a 150-year-old building, you're going, hey, this place is old. There's going to have voids and partitions and additions all over the place that we're not going to be able to fix. Dirk said they were at a big old home, and he says they fought at it for 4 hours and they couldn't put it out. They just, they had all the king's horses and all the king's men, but there was no way they could get that fire out because of all the voids
construction.
In the old building. Yeah.
Well, I had one in Montreal, 9 houses down the street from where I lived. We had a firefighter go through the kitchen floor into the basement, and was very lucky. He ended up right in front of a basement window, and there was a crew just outside, and they were able to pull him out. But that was a weak floor situation where they were inside. The place was full of smoke, but there was no indication of exactly where the fire was, and until he dropped down into the basement, and that was a real lucky one.
Yeah. Well, I think there's room for the fire service to bring their knowledge and experience to the code making process also. We had a fire, I think it was on Halloween, as a matter of fact, a few years ago, and it was in a McMansion, in a row of McMansions, supplied by a 4-inch private water system, and so there wasn't enough water. And these buildings were all built with a silent floor, right? Which is a 2x3 with a oriented strand board or something web in between. And the basements weren't finished, so these were all exposed. And this fire started on the rear deck, and it was a strong windy night. It breached the windows, came in the windows, burned in the basement, burned out the webs and the lightweight structures. The guys went to go in the front doors, but training and awareness, they checked the floor first, and they found that the floor didn't seem sound. And when they got to looking at it later, took everybody through the building afterwards and said, look, all these webs and joists are all burned out. But they were all burned out because they weren't protected. There was no drywall. There was nothing on the bottom. So why is that permitted to build a building with inherently weak fire-wise components and not protect them? So let's go back to timber high-rises or mid-rises and all of that kind of stuff. Their argument about they're safe is because there's a mass of wood and the wood is protected.
Right.
So when it's not, it's not.
My son's townhouse has the floor joists are painted with intumescent paint, so it doesn't, so they don't propagate fire.
It doesn't take that much to.
Why is that not code?
A single single layer of sheetrock or intumescent paint or residential sprinkler, provides lots of protection. But where you have lightweight construction unprotected, it has no inherent fire resistance.
It's all about time, eh? You get a delayed alarm, people aren't home, you got to respond, you got to hook up your water supply, you got to wait for the other crews to arrive because there's only 2 of you on the engine, so staffing issues, water supply issues, and all of those things. If you can buy time, you can be more effective.
Yeah, we did a study with NFPA and UL, it's in the mid-90s, and we got into a real arm wrestling contest with the wood construction people.
I bet you did.
We actually tested, how long a fire could burn with an unprotected structure before a firefighter would fall through. And we were getting times in the 7-8 minutes. And I said, okay, think about it. If you get called right away, 7-8 minutes is about the time you're going to be showing up.
Yeah, so, timing is everything.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's all available on YouTube or on ULFSRI's website, and they got the firefighter dummies on top of the carpet, and the floor collapses under them.
Yeah.
But the second issue there is the tests that they do to validate the safety or adequacy of building components from fire. Are they real world transferable? Do they actually represent what we as firefighters are seeing on a real world basis? I mean, yes, this is really, they're comparative, right? This is better than that, or this is a percentage of that. But where do we get to the point where we say that is the problem?
Well, for instance, we talk about 1 hour and 2 hour rated construction. That doesn't mean that it's going to resist a real fire for 1 hour or for 2 hours.
It's like a 1 hour Scott bottle.
Yeah. It means it will resist the standard test fire for 1 hour, or it will resist the standard test fire for 2 hours. But there's no standard for the fire that you're going to have. It's a simulation and an approximation.
Right.
And,
ask Europe and the rest of the world about fire tests and exterior cladding. Yeah. That's a whole other can of wax. So
I'm sorry, isn't plastic siding acceptable? I'm sorry.
Well, it can pass the test under certain conditions.
Yeah. Not real world conditions.
Right.
Yeah.
So back to our report here.
What do you mean? We're talking about the report. Come on.
Overexertion, strain, or stress called 45 fatalities, 15%, and 40 were as a result of firefighters being lost inside of a building, 14%. So being lost, of course, that panic, the lost, your exertion is up, and then other things cause you to have a medical emergency at the time. Slips, falls, falling through holes, burned in floors caused 13 firefighter deaths, and 12 firefighters died as a result of being caught in or trapped by flashover, which is low, but they're making a difference here between flashover and rapid fire progression.
Yeah, which is, that's a fine line to draw.
That's a fine line, yeah. 7 firefighters were fatally injured when they were struck by objects, 4 by exposure to smoke and toxic products, 1%. The interesting one here, a little further down, nature of injuries. So nearly half the firefighters who were fatally injured operating inside structures died as a result of asphyxiation or smoke. 139, 48%, and just under 1/5 as a result of thermal burns, 53%. Heart attacks accounted for 45, as we mentioned before, and traumatic injuries were 37. And that if they had a thing here about the nature of here we go. I marked it all up in red. There's some noticeable differences that are observed between career and volunteer firefighter fatal injuries. Although asphyxiation or smoke injuries accounted for similar shares of injuries for both career and volunteer, heart attacks were substantially higher amongst the volunteer percentage, 23%, than career at 11%. So the fitness, which is always hard to do. I was in volunteer service forever. And how do we make the volunteer firefighters be fit when, they have lives to live and businesses to work? We have to encourage them and facilitate that fitness so that this doesn't happen. And Denise just jumping at the gun here.
Well, again, statistics don't tell you everything. And so one of the jobs I've done since I retired is I do consulting work with municipal fire departments. And we have discovered that the average age of the volunteer fire service in some departments was 52 years old. There are not a lot of career departments out there that can say that their average age is 52 years old. And if you're in a career fire department, most IAFF contracts stipulate at 60, man, you're done. Mandatory retirement. It's not, I think, overall, strictly speaking, a health issue. It's a promotion issue in some cases. But regardless, you get you out before you're actually severely compromised. And so I think that that's a big factor. Plus, there isn't the same drive necessarily. There's a lot of, to be fit, there's a lot of career departments who have mandatory fitness requirements and or encourage a fitness component, provide fitness. And there's a culture in some departments, not all, but some. And you don't see that necessarily in the volunteer service either, although you do have a lot of very fit volunteers. So, but I think it's tied to age. Honestly, I think it is.
That's a great point and very interesting point.
That's an increasing factor on the volunteer side.
Yes.
That there are a lot of volunteer departments that their average age keeps increasing because they're not bringing in new members. So they're relying on the old ones who are hanging around. So the average age is, where at one time it might have been 35, it went to 40 to 45, and it keeps going up just because they're not bringing in the younger members. And I'd like to see the statistics in Canada. I've seen statistics for some of the states in the U.S. where the decline in the total number of volunteers is incredible. It's just, like
I can show you the stats in my studies.
Yeah, we have stats in Canada. We did a podcast about that when the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs did a state of the fire service in Canada kind of thing. And yeah, we can't get the volunteers. It's such a huge commitment today to be a firefighter in a community with training and service and everything else. You have to be extremely dedicated, and it makes it hard to recruit. It's interesting that the next statistic in the report is firefighters from fatalities from trauma and burns, and the career guys are much higher in the trauma and burns. So you could lead to surmise that it's because they're more aggressive, And
but it's also exposure. It's how many fires do they fight? Because you get to the inner cities of Philadelphia and Baltimore and some of those places.
Numbers are high.
They fight a lot of fires.
And the nature of those structures, most volunteer departments tend to be urban-rural, and I've been in some pretty large urban departments, and a 3-story structure is a big structure. If you had 3-story apartment buildings, that's all you had, and the reason for that, of course, is because 3 stories is a cutoff for sprinklering. Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of the apartment buildings were built that level and lower, so that's within the ability to handle. In a more safe manner, if you will, than doing a 150-year-old 4-story walk-up on a street that's only as wide as your truck in downtown Baltimore. So I think the risk factor, like you said, is definitely there, not to mention the number of fires, yes.
Report shows that 63% of fire deaths occurred in residential properties. So 1, 2, single family, up to 6 units. A big percentage of fires were in. So it's really where firefighters are dying is in residences. If you get into
I would say I think you're misinterpreting that stat. You said 60. What was the number? 65% are residential.
63% occurred in residential.
63%. Right. And of the number of fires, period, that there is, I think the number of residential versus total fires is something like over 90%.
Right.
So over 90% of the fires is killing 63%. The other 40% almost is happening in non-residential. Those are your low incident number, high risk fires, your commercials, your industrials. So in fact, an industrial commercial fire is far more dangerous.
Which we found on the podcast because you typically apply residential tactics to a commercial structure, and then we're into Gordon Graham's thing about low frequency, high risk, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to the men, women, and children. It's like, everybody lives in a residence. They spend at least half their time in a residence, and that's where most fires occur.
Yeah. So, well, plus I think in industrial, commercial type fires, you can get a delayed alarm, for instance,
right?
Because mercantile and so forth, not occupied. And if you look at the statistics on those things, there's a lot of daytime fires in those, but there's a lot of off-hour fires. And from my experience, at least in my head, most of the really bad fires happened after I was in bed.
Yeah. So
and you woke up, the pager went off, and you went, "What time is it?" "Oh, this ain't going to be good." And then you go out the door.
So to move towards wrapping this tailboard discussion up, the good news here is the data on firefighter fatalities, interior firefighting incidents offer some evidence that safety efforts are having an impact over time, reducing the deaths on interior operations, although fluctuations, of course, occur. Since 1998, one notable safety initiative, of course, 98 was NIOSH started doing the detailed investigations of firefighter on-duty fatalities and prevention measures, right? Because that's about when they started in the late 90s. It used to be the U.S. Fire Administration did investigations on significant fires, but there was no mandate to investigate every firefighter death. And then NIOSH,
that came with I
CDC.
think that was 97 that was adopted, and they hired the people in 98, roughly.
Right. So that's been good because it's printing the lesson. It's providing it accessible to firefighters who are interested, in training officers and chiefs. Why are people dying in fires? So spreading that message. The Firefighter Fatality Investigation and Prevention Program is what it was called, which we get a lot of our reports that we do on the podcast from. But it also found out that, of course, in those, typically size up, SOPs, guidelines for risk management, rapid intervention teams, ensuring everybody's ready for immediate response. Those all come out of those reports because that's what those reports said, right?
And that's also building on things like NFPA 1500 that was written in the 80s, adopted in 87. So 90 was the decade in which a lot of that was, coming into the forefront.
The two in, two out happened back then too.
Two in, two out was right around 96 or so that was brought in.
But what's missing from these stats, and I think is important from an individual fire chief's point of view, fire department's point of view, is these are the deaths. This is where you went extreme on the incident. You killed somebody died. What's not there are the near misses. And I've been involved personally in a number of near misses that affected me during my career as a firefighter. And, when I was, down on the line, hauling hose and going into buildings with the pack on. So I had a number of near misses. So there's a connection between fatalities and near misses, and between near misses and just incidents. And this is a long established connection. And it was, it's something called the Heinrich triangle, where a certain number of near misses represents a certain number of minor incidents, a certain number of major incidents, and then a certain number of deaths and fatalities. And Frank Bird did this expanded on this and introduced in '85 something called practical loss control leadership, which we were very heavily involved with when I worked in industry and petrochemical and nuclear. So we very much tracked those things, like the big sign, number of days since lost time injury and stuff. It's all related.
Yeah.
And I think it's related in a way because it reflects the safety culture in the organization. It reflects the focus that is put on safety and doing things in a way getting results. Of course, you're there to be a firefighter. You're not there to stand on the side and go, oh my, that's a dangerous fire. But to take the additional steps to make yourself safe and to make your staff safe. But if you don't track these near misses and you don't find out what these almost incidents are, you're going to be totally surprised when the real incident is no longer a near miss, it's a hit. And so I think you need individually as a fire department and chief to be tracking those things.
Yeah, it would be fascinating if we could really keep track of near misses to see if the ratio of near misses to serious injuries to fatalities has changed. I think just in the arm's length analysis, the ratios probably stay about the same. But
you'd have to admit that you had a near miss to start with.
Yeah, and then you'd have to have a way to document it and to score it.
Yeah,
that's an organizational thing. You need to introduce that.
There's the whole issue of Maydays. Don Abbott, who we miss greatly, did a lot of analysis on Maydays, and
those are near misses.
A Mayday is a very near miss. There are a lot more near misses than Maydays, but a Mayday is definitely a near miss.
That's right.
Yeah, and we did an episode on Don Abbott's project there and some of the stats that came out a couple of years ago. So definitely all stuff to consider. The report goes on to talk about numerous NIOSH alerts and training issues that they had identified for people to. The one, of course, is, vacant building marking, which some cities like Baltimore actually had started, and they didn't have the money to continue the program. And then 3 firefighters died in 2021 in a vacant building, and now they've reinitiated that activity of marking vacant buildings, although we still need to check them because they're vacant. So these are the problems that occur, right?
But like in Canada, for instance, you can have a vacant building, and as a code enforcement official, fire department, in other words, you have the ability to force that building to be sealed. And if they keep opening it, you have the ability to go in and do it yourself and charge the property owner. And if you can't do that and you can't maintain its safety, you have the ability to go in and take it down. And you bill them. Eventually, you own the site. You got to get off the chair and do your thing.
Yeah,
I've done it once in my brief history as a full-time chief, where we had a building and worked with the various municipal officials and provincial officials to actually have the building demolished. But it's a process, and if you've got hundreds of them, it's hard to get done.
If it's the safety of your own guys, what else have you got that's more important? Seriously.
There you go. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we should all be doing.
How was that in urban Montreal, Chief? How did that work?
Well, we were pretty aggressive on getting them secured, and occasionally getting them demolished. But getting them demolished got into a lot of bureaucracy. But the city had a very active program to identify vacant buildings and get them secured. And the fire department kept track of all of them pretty rigorously. But we didn't have tens of thousands. We had 1,000 or so.
Yeah, the most dangerous.
Yeah, but I compare that with I've got a lot of friends in Philadelphia and Baltimore, so I keep coming back to them, and they're multiplying faster than you can inventory them.
Detroit, Buffalo, same thing.
Yeah.
But if you have a fire in one of these buildings, why do you leave the building standing after the fire? I mean, my MO on that is we would put the fire out, and then we would make it safe. Then we do the fire investigation to find out what happened, and then there was an order to make the building safe, and usually that involved a backhoe, and the building was safe when we left the site.
Well, that was a huge factor in the investigation of the fire in Baltimore, where they had 3 fatalities.
Yep.
That building that had a previous fire had been
Yep.
identified, but no action had been taken. It hadn't been placarded. It hadn't been put into the information system to warn firefighters that it was a vacant building in dangerous structural condition. So they go there at 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning with fire showing, and they just barely got inside, and it all came down on them.
Yep. Exactly.
But then you talk to the firefighters and the chiefs in some of those places, and they say they have so many squatters in those buildings
Yes.
that they feel compelled to to do interior searches because they find people.
Yeah, because obviously the fire started from something. If there's no power, there's no nothing. Well, the only other thing is human activity that could have started it, right? So whether they were inside or outside, no. Good. No, all good points. Great discussion. So in conclusion, the downward trend in the number of firefighter deaths from the report here in interior structure fires and the number of fatal interior structure fire incidents between 98 and 22 provides some indication that efforts to improve interior firefighting safety are meeting with success. Moreover, the average number of interior fatal fires incidents is falling. The annual average firefighter interior structure fire fatalities fell by 58% if you look at the last 4 or 5 years. In particular, encouraging that the number of incidents resulting in multiple firefighter fatalities has significantly declined over the past 25 years. So we need to keep it up in all the activities that we're doing and promote them and talk about them.
Don't count on it continuing to decline. I wouldn't count on that at all.
Yeah, and let's not get complacent. We're halfway there, but every firefighter fatality is bad news, and it's one that we didn't manage to prevent.
Yeah, a symptom of the problem that we need to keep on top of at all times.
Yeah, and like we've said before, nothing changes your fire department like killing one of your own. It really shakes things up. So better not to do that.
Let's avoid it and shake it up. Shake it up before that happens.
That's right.
Yeah.
More gently.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much for listening to another emergency traffic episode. Give us a like, give us a thumbs up, and tell a friend.